Harlow, a small town tucked away in the dense forests of northern Maine, was the kind of place where time seemed to stand still. Its narrow streets, lined with weathered wooden houses, gave the impression that the town had been forgotten by progress. The population hovered just above 1,000, and everyone knew everyone. It was a quiet place. Too quiet, some would say. For decades, Harlow thrived in its own little bubble. Tourists rarely ventured this far off the beaten path, and the locals liked it that way. The town's only connection to the outside world was a single radio tower perched atop a nearby hill. This tower broadcasted the local station, HLR 98.7, run by an old-timer named Gerald Harris. Every evening, Gerald would play old folk songs and give updates on local happenings, lost pets, church bake sales, and the occasional storm warning. But on the night of September 18th, everything changed. The last broadcast from Harlow wasn't Gerald's usual cheerful chatter. Instead, at precisely 8:13 p.m., the radio crackled with static, and a panicked voice came through. "If anyone's out there, please, we need help. Something's happening in Harlow. The lights! Oh God, the lights!" The signal cut off abruptly. 24 hours later, the Maine State Police dispatched a search team to investigate. Officers, reporters, and even a few curious locals arrived at the edge of town, only to find nothing. Where Harlow should have been was an empty clearing, overgrown with weeds and trees that looked decades old. There was no sign of houses, no roads, no people, just an eerie silence that seemed to press down on anyone who stepped too close. The only clue was the faint outline of the town's main street, visible in patches of grass that grew unevenly, as if the earth itself hadn't yet decided what to do with the vanished town. Even stranger, the radio tower was still there, standing tall and untouched. Its red light blinked against the twilight sky as if mocking the searchers. News of Harlow's disappearance spread quickly, turning the small town into a national sensation. Conspiracy theorists had a field day, proposing everything from government experiments to alien abduction. Scientists were baffled. There were no signs of natural disasters or seismic activity, but the locals who had lived near Harlow had their own stories they had been reluctant to share. "I saw lights," said Margaret Platt, a farmer whose property bordered the town. "Not like car lights or flashlights. These were alive, like they were moving on their own. They came from the woods and just hung there, pulsing like they were breathing. Then they moved toward the town." Others spoke of strange noises, low, humming sounds that seemed to vibrate deep in their bones. One man claimed he had seen shadowy figures in the forest, watching the town from a distance. His neighbors dismissed him as a drunk, but now they weren't so sure. The government eventually cordoned off the area, citing environmental hazards. But that didn't stop thrill seekers and paranormal enthusiasts from sneaking past the barriers. Few made it far. Those who did returned pale and trembling, muttering about strange whispers and cold hands brushing against their skin. Weeks turned into months, and the mystery of Harlow faded from the headlines. Most people moved on, chalking it up to one of life's unsolvable enigmas. But for the families of the missing, the pain lingered. They held vigils, hoping against hope that their loved ones would somehow return. Then, in late December, something else happened. A trucker passing through the area claimed to have picked up a hitchhiker, a young woman wearing tattered clothes. She was barefoot and shivering, her eyes darting nervously toward the trees. When he asked her where she was from, she whispered one word: Harlow. The trucker reported the incident to the authorities, but by the time they arrived, the woman was gone. All they found was a muddy footprint on the side of the road, leading back toward the forest. And deep in the woods where Harlow once stood, the blinking red light of the radio tower continued its silent vigil, casting long shadows across the empty clearing. Something was still there, waiting, In the months following Harlow's disappearance, the area around the clearing became a hotspot for investigators, journalists, and self-proclaimed paranormal experts. Some came with cameras and equipment, hoping to document strange phenomena. Others came simply out of morbid curiosity. But the longer they stayed, the more unsettling their experiences became. David Carmichael, a local journalist for the Bangor Daily News, was one of the first outsiders to push past the government's cordon. He wasn't there to chase ghosts or UFOs. He wanted answers. Armed with a notebook, a flashlight, and a handheld recorder, he set up camp near the edge of the clearing. The first night was quiet, too quiet. The usual sounds of the forest, like chirping crickets and rustling leaves, were conspicuously absent. Instead, there was a low hum in the air, so faint it was almost imperceptible, like the vibration of a distant engine. David ignored it at first, chalking it up to nerves. But as the night wore on, the hum grew louder, shifting in pitch like a radio struggling to find a signal. Around 3 a.m., his recorder, which had been sitting idle on a tree stump, suddenly crackled to life. "Hello? Is someone there?" David whispered, his voice barely audible over the static. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, through the hiss and crackle, a voice emerged. "Harlow?" David's blood ran cold. The voice was faint but unmistakable. A woman's voice, strained and full of fear. He grabbed the recorder and rewound the tape, but when he played it back, all he heard was static. The next morning, David left the clearing, shaken, but determined to uncover the truth. Over the next week, he interviewed anyone who had been near the site. Several locals reported hearing similar voices, often late at night. Others claimed to have seen strange lights hovering over the clearing, soft, pulsating orbs that disappeared the moment anyone tried to approach. Meanwhile, strange phenomena began to spread beyond Harlow's borders. Radios in nearby towns started picking up bursts of static, sometimes accompanied by faint voices. One trucker driving along Route 16 reported hearing his name whispered over his CB radio, followed by a woman's sobbing. The phenomenon escalated in mid-January when a young boy in the neighboring town of Millfield went missing. His parents claimed he had been playing near the edge of the forest when they heard him scream. By the time they reached the spot, he was gone. Authorities organized a massive search, but after 3 days, the boy was presumed dead. Then on the fourth night, his voice came over the radio. "Mom? Dad? It's cold here. I can see the lights." The transmission lasted only a few seconds, but it was enough to send chills through everyone who heard it. The boy's parents were inconsolable, and despite the efforts of search teams, he was never found. Scientists and government officials began to take notice. A team from the University of Maine set up a research station near the clearing, equipped with cutting-edge technology. They recorded electromagnetic anomalies, temperature fluctuations, and unexplained energy surges, but none of it made sense. One of the researchers, Dr. Emily Cross, described the clearing as a wound in reality. "We're dealing with something beyond our understanding," she told a reporter. "It's as if the fabric of space-time has been disrupted." But the strangest discovery came in late February, when a graduate student monitoring the radio tower noticed something unusual. The tower was broadcasting a continuous signal, one that hadn't been detected before. When the signal was decoded, it revealed a pattern, a series of coordinates. The coordinates pointed to a location deep within the forest, miles away from the clearing. A search party was assembled, consisting of researchers, police officers, and a few local volunteers. Armed with flashlights and maps, they ventured into the woods following the signal. What they found was both impossible and horrifying. At the specified coordinates, the group stumbled upon a series of structures, houses, streets, and buildings, all in varying states of decay. It was Harlow, but not as anyone remembered it. The town looked like it had been abandoned for decades. Windows were shattered, Roofs had caved in, and vegetation had overtaken the streets. In the center of town stood a church, its steeple leaning precariously to one side. The front doors were wide open, revealing a dark interior. One of the officers, a young woman named Claire Novak, entered the church with her flashlight. What she saw made her scream. Inside the church were dozens of people, standing perfectly still. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide and unblinking. They didn't move or speak. They just stood there, staring at the altar. And then, as Claire backed away, they all turned to look at her. The search party fled, leaving their equipment behind. When they returned with reinforcements the next day, the town was gone. In its place was another empty clearing, overgrown with weeds. The blinking red light of the radio tower continued its silent rhythm, as if mocking those who dared to investigate. And in the static-filled airwaves, the voices of the missing whispered their warnings. "Don't look for us. Stay away." The search party's discovery of Harlow and its sudden disappearance the next day became the tipping point. The government declared the area a restricted zone, enforcing the ban with armed guards and surveillance drones. But the mystery only deepened as those who had been in the search party began to experience vivid nightmares. Claire Novak, the officer who had entered the church, became the most affected. She couldn't stop seeing the faces of the townspeople, pale, lifeless, and staring directly at her. In her dreams, she found herself standing in the middle of Harlow, surrounded by shadows that whispered her name. One night, she woke to find her radio crackling with static. At first, she thought it was malfunctioning, but then a voice broke through. "Claire, you saw us." The voice was cold and monotone, but it felt as if it were coming from inside her head. Claire grabbed the radio and hurled it across the room, shattering it into pieces. But the whispers didn't stop. They were with her everywhere, in the hum of fluorescent lights, in the rush of the wind, even in the distant rumble of traffic. By the end of the week, Claire resigned from the police force and vanished without a trace. Others connected to the investigation reported similar phenomena. David Carmichael, the journalist, began hearing strange sounds on his recordings, murmurs, screams, and faint music, as if from a distant, broken gramophone. On a particularly windy night, he ventured back to the clearing, unable to shake the feeling that something was calling to him. When he arrived, the radio tower was flashing erratically, its red light flickering like a heartbeat. As David approached, his recorder picked up a new transmission. "We're here. Trapped. Find the door." David didn't understand what it meant, but he felt an overwhelming compulsion to walk deeper into the forest. His flashlight flickered, and the trees around him seemed to shift, their branches curling toward him like grasping fingers. Then, just as suddenly, the light stabilized, and he found himself standing at the edge of the abandoned Harlow once again. This time, the town was different. The buildings were intact, their windows glowing faintly as if illuminated from within. The streets were lined with figures, their faces obscured by shadows, and in the center of town stood the church, its doors now tightly shut. David hesitated but stepped forward. The figures turned to watch him, their heads tilting unnaturally as he passed. When he reached the church, the doors creaked open on their own, revealing a staircase that descended into darkness. David's recordings from that night were later recovered by hikers who stumbled upon his abandoned campsite. The audio was disjointed, full of static and strange distortions. But a few clear fragments remained. "I'm inside. It's so dark, but there are voices. They're everywhere. There's a door. It's glowing. I think it's... Oh God, they're here. They're coming." The tape ended abruptly, and David was never seen again. The phenomena surrounding Harlow reached a fever pitch in the following months. More people went missing, campers, hikers, even a few soldiers assigned to guard the area. Each disappearance was accompanied by strange reports. Lights in the sky, whispers in the wind, and an increasing number of unexplained radio transmissions. Dr. Emily Cross, the scientist who had called the clearing a wound in reality, proposed a chilling theory. She believed Harlow hadn't disappeared at all. It had been pulled into another dimension, a place she called the Veil. According to her research, the town existed in a liminal space, caught between worlds. The lights and voices were echoes of the people trapped there, trying to break through. But the Veil was unstable, and anyone who ventured too close risked being pulled in. Emily's warnings were ignored. The government wanted answers, and they launched a covert operation to retrieve the missing. A team of 6 highly trained operatives was sent into the forest, equipped with state-of-the-art equipment designed to withstand electromagnetic interference. Only one returned. Agent Marcus Reed emerged from the forest 3 days later, barefoot and disoriented. His clothes were torn and his skin was covered in strange, circular burns. When questioned, he spoke in fragmented sentences as if he were struggling to remember. "They're not dead," he muttered. "They're waiting. They want us to join them." When pressed for more details, Marcus began to convulse. He collapsed on the floor, his eyes rolling back as his body spasmed violently. His last words, spoken in a voice that wasn't his own, sent chills through the room. "The door is open." After Marcus's death, the government sealed off the area permanently, erecting a massive concrete wall around the forest. All mentions of Harlow were erased from public records, and anyone who spoke of the town was silenced. But the Veil didn't stay contained. Radio stations across the country began picking up strange broadcasts, faint, desperate voices calling for help. Reports of strange lights and shadowy figures spread like wildfire from the forests of Oregon to the swamps of Louisiana. It was as if Harlow's curse was spreading, tearing through the fabric of reality itself. And in the static, one message repeated over and over: "The door is open. Don't come looking."